Chosen One, the sheer magnitude of the campaign launched against you has reached a breaking point. Everyone is shocked how far they went trying to take you out with zero proof, as the desperate coordination of their lies finally begins to crumble. You only wage war on what you cannot compete with, and their relentless effort to burn your character to the ground was a loud confession of your power. Before there were accusations, before there was noise, before there was a campaign, there was just a moment. A quiet, completely unremarkable moment when someone looked at you and felt something they did not expect to feel. What they felt, standing in your presence, was something they had not anticipated. They felt threatened, not because you said anything inflammatory, not because you did anything wrong, just because of how you moved through the world. The way you carried yourself without needing anyone to validate it, the way people were naturally drawn to your energy without you campaigning for their attention, the way your presence, your simple, consistent, unbothered presence, shifted the temperature in a room without you lifting a single finger. Something cracked in them right there. Something small at first, barely noticeable, just a hairline fracture in the story they had been telling themselves about how things were supposed to work, about who was supposed to be the one with presence, about who was supposed to have that kind of natural authority and favor. It was not supposed to be you, not in their version of things. So that fracture quietly widened, and instead of examining it, instead of asking what it meant, instead of using it as an invitation to grow into something better, they covered it, they painted over it, and they started looking for reasons why you were the problem. Because if you were the problem, the crack was not their issue to deal with, it was yours. That is where every smear campaign begins, not with a lie, but with an insecurity that someone refuses to face. And then they go looking for a story that makes that insecurity feel justified. You became that story, not because of anything you did, but because of what you were becoming, and because of what they could already sense in you before you had even fully sensed it in yourself. You were operating from a completely different source than they were. They were running on external validation, on the energy extracted from controlling how people perceived everything around them. And you were running on something internal, something that did not need their permission to keep going, something that could not be switched off simply by changing the public narrative around you. That is a terrifying thing to encounter when your entire power structure depends on controlling perception, because if you cannot control how someone is perceived, and that person does not need your validation to function, your leverage disappears completely. People who have built their whole world on leveraging perception over others experience a genuine identity crisis the moment they encounter someone who is immune to that leverage. You were immune, not because you were naive, but because you were anchored to something they could not reach. And that immunity, your genuine, unperformative, completely real refusal to participate in their games, was the original disruption. You broke their system just by being real inside it. They could not call you loud, so they called you cold. They could not say you were dishonest, so they said you were too private, too guarded, hard to read. They could not prove you were dangerous, so they started using language that was deliberately vague. Something about them feels off. I just do not trust them. There is something they are not telling people. That is not accusation. That is architecture. They were building a frame, and they built it out of fog on purpose, because fog is impossible to disprove. You cannot fight something feels off. You cannot present evidence against a vibe. They knew that. That was the design from the beginning. They took your actual character, the one you built through years of showing up, staying consistent, and doing the right thing even when it cost you, and they painted over it with the mess of their own projections. They treated your name like a blank canvas and filled in what they did not know with what they needed you to be, because the real you was inconvenient. The real you did not fit the story they were writing, so they built a fictional version of you and circulated it like it was documented fact. The people watching did not ask for proof. They went along with the noise, and this is the part that stings, not because people are malicious, but because a story told with enough confidence and enough emotion genuinely feels true. It feels like something you already knew. So people nodded. They repeated it. They added their own color to it, and the fog thickened into something that started to feel like a wall. Every single thing they accused you of, every vague, unverifiable, deliberately unprovable charge they put into circulation was a projection. Every accusation was a description of them, not you. And that truth runs all the way to the end of this. When it finally surfaces completely, the whole fabrication unravels at once. If you felt the truth in these words, hype this video so more chosen ones like you can see it. When the fog campaign did not finish you, when you kept showing up, kept moving, kept being exactly who you were regardless of what was being circulated, they escalated. They got closer. They got more intentional, more observant, more invested in finding the thing that would finally crack you. They studied you like a case that needed to be solved. They watched your words, your patterns, your associations, your silences, your reactions under pressure. They waited for the slip, for the contradiction, for the moment of weakness that would finally prove that the strength you carried was not real, and they found nothing. There was no contradiction, no hidden flaw, no evidence that the strength you carried was anything other than exactly what it looked like. Every time they expected you to lash out, you did not. Every time they expected you to collapse under the pressure, you did not. Every time they constructed a situation designed to expose something ugly in you, you walked through it clean. And that is precisely when the operation shifted from investigation to invention. They stop looking for evidence and start manufacturing it. Suddenly your quietness became proof of something sinister. Your consistency became too calculated. Your peace became suspicious. Your refusal to participate in their drama became manipulation. They flipped every piece of evidence of your character into a character flaw, and they did it so confidently that some people could not tell the difference between what was real and what was constructed. But here is what was quietly happening underneath all of that. Every fake charge they invented, every manufactured flaw they circulated, every sin they laid at your door, it was actually a precise description of how they themselves operated. Their projection was their confession, sitting there in plain sight for anyone paying close enough attention to read it clearly. Here is something they did not account for when they launched this thing, your refusal to engage on their terms. That was not silence in the sense that you had nothing to say. It was silence in the sense that you chose not to step onto the battlefield they had specifically constructed to disadvantage you. That choice, dignified, grounded, and absolutely maddening to them, was doing more damage to their operation than anything you could have said in response. A smear campaign only works in one of two ways. Either the person it targets collapses under the weight of it, which gives the campaign its apparent credibility, or that person fires back with the same chaotic energy, which muddies the waters and makes both sides look equally messy. They built the whole operation expecting one of those two outcomes. They had invested in one of those two outcomes. You gave them neither. You went quiet in the way that only someone who truly knows who they are can go quiet, not the quiet of someone with no defense, but the quiet of someone who does not need to defend, because truth surfaces on its own timetable. You understood something they did not. Engaging their manufactured drama on their terms would cost you far more than your reputation. It would cost you your focus, your energy, your forward momentum, and those were the exact things producing the elevation they were desperately trying to stop. So you protected your peace like it was currency, because it was. Every day you stayed on your path, while they spent their energy maintaining the campaign, was another day your life compounded in value, and theirs burned in futility. Investments compound. Burned resources do not come back. They wanted a war. You gave them a mirror, and looking into that mirror, looking at their own obsessive, evidence-free, exhausting campaign reflected back at them, is precisely what started the fractures forming inside their own circle. Chosen ones, they never expected this. And they really didn't expect us to keep talking. You've noticed it. Chosen one channels disappearing. videos pulled, voices scrubbed from the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. And now we have something they truly can't silence. The technology used to suppress consciousness has been reverse-engineered, and Destiny Engine is the result. What was once used against humanity is now your ascension weapon. Join Destiny Engine and you're supporting your favorite channels while leveling up yourself at the same time. It's a 360 win. You can now MK Ultra yourself into 5D superpowers. Destiny Engine bypasses the conscious mind and rewrites the source code directly. Reality bends faster. Synchronicities stack. Your nervous system upgrades to a higher bandwidth. Put on headphones. Press play. That's all. For $1, you switch sides of history. Click the link in the description. The takeover is internal. One person with an insecurity is manageable. One person with an insecurity and an audience becomes a campaign. They could not do this alone, and they knew it. A single voice accusing you of nothing provable is easy to dismiss, but a chorus is harder to argue against because volume feels like validity and numbers feel like evidence. When multiple people are all saying the same thing at once, even if that thing originated from one bitter, threatened, insecure source, it starts to sound like consensus, so they recruited. They went to the people who already had friction with your light, not because of anything specific you did to them, but because your existence reminded them of everything they had not yet become. Those people became the army, not an army of facts, but an army of shared resentment, dressed up as collective concern. Nobody fact-checked the source. Nobody asked about the motive. Nobody paused to consider that the loudest voice might have the most to hide. One person lied. The next repeated it. The third swore they had heard the same thing independently. And just like that, whispers became witness statements and gossip became gospel. That is not truth. That is groupthink. And groupthink is never about justice. It is about comfort. It is about people who resent your elevation, finding other people who share that resentment and mistaking collective feeling for collective fact. They require constant feeding. They need new drama, new accusations, new escalations just to stay together. Because the moment the emotion cools and people start actually thinking, they begin asking real questions. Questions like, where is the evidence? Why does the person everyone warned us about keep standing, keep moving, keep showing up whole? Why do the loudest voices in this crowd seem to be the most unstable ones? Those questions are being asked right now, and they will not stop being asked. Most of the people they recruited were not true believers. Most of them were opportunists, people who saw a crowd forming and decided that joining felt safer than standing apart. Some had unrelated grievances and found a convenient outlet for them. Some simply liked being on the inside of something, even when the inside of that something was built entirely on manufactured outrage and borrowed fury. Those people do not have the same stake as the ones who designed and launched the operation. Participation is easy when the crowd feels righteous and the energy is high. But the moment the energy starts to flatten, the moment you, the person who was supposed to be crumbling, are visibly not crumbling, doubt creeps in quietly from the edges. The architects felt that doubt spreading through the ranks, so they had to keep escalating. Every time you kept standing, they had to generate new material. Every time your consistency made the accusations look thin, they had to pile on new accusations to compensate for the thinness. Every escalation required more coordination, more energy, more careful management of who knew what version of the story and when. What they were building was never sustainable. You cannot sustain a structure built on nothing. And you're standing, simply standing, with no dramatic counter-move, no orchestrated public response, was slowly forcing them to work harder and harder to maintain something that was becoming less believable with every single passing day. Some of the people they recruited started going quiet, not publicly, not dramatically, just quietly unavailable for the next conversation about you, starting to find other things to focus on, beginning to drift away from the loudest voices. because privately, in the space between what they were saying publicly and what they were actually observing, the math was starting to stop adding up. Your consistency did that. Your peace did that. Your unbothered, forward-moving, accumulating life did that. And here is what is remarkable. You were not even doing it strategically. You were just living. You were just being who you are. And who you are was doing the work without you consciously directing any of it. That is what Chosen looks like from the inside. Not dramatic, not choreographed, just real, and real sustained over time in the presence of everything fake always wins. Under the weight of all of it, the coordinated noise, the recruited crowd, the manufactured accusations, the constant low-grade pressure of being misrepresented everywhere you turned, you started to show the strain. Of course you did. Any person under that kind of sustained, deliberate psychological pressure would start to show the strain. That is not weakness. That is simply what prolonged, targeted pressure does to a human being, and it is important that you understand the difference. And the people running the campaign saw that strain, and they used it. When you pulled back to protect whatever peace you had left, they called it suspicious withdrawal. When the exhaustion of being constantly misrepresented finally showed on your face, they circled that moment like it was evidence and held it up for everyone to see. Look how they are falling apart, they said. We told you there was something wrong with them. They never mentioned that they were the source of the pressure. They never included the gaslighting, the deliberate isolation, or the calculated betrayals in the story they told to everyone else. They edited out the cause entirely and presented only the reaction, and then they held up your reaction to the wound they created and called it proof of your character. Nobody asked what caused the wound. It was easier to call you broken than to admit they were the ones doing the breaking. Even at your most exhausted, most uncertain, most visibly strained, you were still more real than anything they were performing around you. Your struggle came from actual survival. Their confidence came from maintaining a show. And that is exactly why your visible pain made them so uncomfortable. It reminded them that they could not survive what they were putting you through, not with their integrity intact. And the moment you started healing, the moment you stood up straighter and started moving forward again, they panicked, because a healed version of you is the one thing their entire narrative cannot survive. Your healing is the testimony they cannot cross-examine. Everything you have walked through, the manufactured case, the recruited crowd, the weaponized pain, the obsessive surveillance, all of it has been pointing toward a truth they never said out loud. It is a truth they probably could not even fully articulate to themselves. Here it is. They were never attacking your past. They were attacking your future. They did not come for you because of something you did. They came for you because of what they sensed you were becoming. Even before you had fully stepped into your power, even when you were still figuring things out, still finding your footing, still uncertain about the full scope of what you were carrying, they could feel the rise happening. They actually felt it before you did. The way you carried yourself, the way things seemed to open up for you without you forcing them, the way your presence shifted atmospheres you were not even consciously trying to shift. They understood on some instinctive pre-verbal level that the trajectory you were on was going to take you somewhere they could not follow, not because they were barred from it, but because everything producing the rise in you required the very things they had consistently refused to do. The honesty, the consistency, the integrity maintained even when it cost you, the willingness to remain real in a world that endlessly rewards performance. They saw where you were going, and they knew they could not go there. So the only option left in their minds was to make sure you did not get there either. Every accusation, every lie, every recruited person, every weaponized moment of your pain, it was all one thing. It was a desperate, panicked, ultimately futile attempt to beat the clock, to take you down before the trajectory became undeniable, to damage your name before your actions had the chance to speak louder than their lies. And Chosen One, they were not wrong about where you were going. They just fatally underestimated the thing that was carrying you there, because what has been placed inside you, what has been assigned to your path, cannot be touched by any campaign built on human jealousy and fear. It was always going to outlast every lie they manufactured and every crowd they assembled. They panicked over your destiny, and that panic is the loudest confirmation you could have received that your destiny is absolutely real. People are shocked, not mildly surprised, not slightly taken aback, but genuinely deeply shocked. The way you are shocked when you see the full scope of something and realize it was far bigger, far more coordinated, and far more desperate than anything you had imagined. The curtain has been pulled back, and what is behind it is more extreme than most people were prepared to see. People are shocked at how far the operation against you was actually willing to go, and that shock is doing something very specific right now. It is changing who looks credible in this situation, because when people discover how far someone went to take you down with zero proof to justify any of it, the natural next question becomes why? Why would anyone invest that much? Why would anyone burn that many relationships and generate that sustained, coordinated level of noise against someone who supposedly did nothing worth noting? The scale of the attack is the evidence of your value. Let that land fully before you move past it. Massive, coordinated, evidence-free operations do not get launched against people who do not matter. They get launched against people who are genuinely moving the room, against people who carry something real, real character, real authority, real favor, that cannot be manufactured or politically maneuvered into existence. Those are the people who attract coordinated opposition, because those are the people worth neutralizing before they become too undeniable to contain. People are now doing the math. They are looking at the size of what was deployed against you. They are looking at the complete absence of actual evidence underneath it, and they are arriving at a conclusion that no amount of continued campaigning can undo the size of the operation confirms the size of the threat, and the size of the threat confirms the size of what lives inside you. That realization is what has people stunned, not just at how far the campaign went, but at what going that far reveals about who you actually are, and about what all of this was really about from the very beginning. They went all the way, with nothing real to stand on, and in doing so, they handed you the most powerful confirmation you could have received, paid for entirely with their own desperation, and delivered by their own hands. Now we look at what was hiding inside every single thing they did. Watch how it all points back to the source. Every lie they told about you was a detailed, unintentional, inadvertent description of themselves. Every accusation they circulated was a projection of what they were actually doing, actually hiding, and actually afraid of being exposed for. The smear campaign was not just an attack on your reputation, it was a confession running underneath every word of it, hiding in plain sight the entire time. Think about it carefully. When they called you calculating, who was the one running a coordinated, deliberately orchestrated operation against someone with zero evidence to justify it? When they called you manipulative, who was the one recruiting people to a cause built entirely on manufactured accusations? When they called you dangerous, who was the one using someone's visible pain as propaganda in a public campaign? When they called you a fraud, who was the one performing concern for others while privately maintaining an operation designed to destroy someone's name? Every charge, every label, every fog-covered and conveniently unprovable accusation, it was them describing themselves and using your name as the cover story. The details kept changing. The claims kept getting bigger and more dramatic, but the actual evidence never materialized. Because they were not working from memory of something that genuinely happened. They were working from projection, and projection has no consistent source to draw from. It just keeps generating new material, based on new fears and new things they needed to keep buried about themselves. But a campaign built entirely on projection eventually runs out of cover, because the evidence of who you actually are keeps accumulating in plain sight. Your actions, your character, your consistency, All of it compiles into a record that nobody paid to produce and nobody can discredit. And that record started speaking louder than anything they were putting into circulation. The campaign backfired, specifically and completely, not because you fought back, but because you did not. You let truth be its own defense, and truth, left alone to work at its own pace, always outlasts the noise that was built to drown it out. Every move they made led back to them, every single time. Your innocence in this was not just the absence of guilt, it was an active force, and it was the specific thing they could not figure out how to neutralize, no matter how many angles they tried or how long they kept pushing. You did not bend. That is the part that kept breaking their strategy open at the seams. Every system they tried to pressure you into, every manipulation they tried to activate in you, you genuinely did not go there. Not because you were performing restraint for an audience, but because the real you simply does not operate that way. You were not controllable. You could not be guilt-tripped or socially pressured into performing a version of yourself that would make them feel safer around you. That drove them to a level of frustration that is hard to fully describe from the outside. Because people who run these operations need your participation to function, they need you to either fight back on their terms or collapse on their terms, because either response keeps you inside the frame they built. Either response gives them something real to work with and point to. Your complete refusal to participate in their frame was the thing that made the whole operation start rotting from the inside, because you cannot maintain a false narrative about someone who keeps showing up as undeniably real. Eventually, the contrast between the story being circulated and the actual person living their life becomes too stark for even casual observers to ignore. Consider what your actual life was producing during the entire time the campaign was running against you. While fog was being manufactured around your name, you were building something. While people were being recruited against you, you were compiling a daily record that nobody paid for and nobody scripted. Your character was writing its own testimony every single day, not for an audience, not as a strategy, but simply because that is who you genuinely are. And that record, the quiet, accumulated daily record of who you actually are, is now more visible than everything they spent so much energy putting into circulation against you. Because you cannot fake a record, you can only make one, and yours was being made the entire time. They could not destroy your innocence, they could only exhaust themselves trying, and exhausted people make mistakes, and mistakes over time become the real story that people eventually remember. You are not a victim who survived a smear campaign. That is not the identity you are carrying out of this. That is the small version of the story, the one that keeps you defined by what was done to you rather than by who you actually are. Here is the larger, truer version. You are a threat that was correctly identified and incorrectly assumed could be neutralized. You walked into spaces, and without trying, without campaigning, without performing or posturing for anyone, you shifted the dynamics of those spaces just by being authentically who you are. That is power, not the manufactured kind that requires a platform or a carefully constructed public image, but the real kind, the kind that operates whether or not anyone is acknowledging it, the kind that cannot be turned off because it does not require external permission to exist. The people who felt that power, who were unsettled by it, threatened by it, frightened by what it implied about their own standing, actually saw you more clearly in that moment than you saw yourself. They recognized what was in you before you had fully recognized it. Their attack was a form of testimony, the most uncomfortable, backhanded, furious testimony imaginable, but testimony nonetheless. You do not mobilize that kind of coordinated, sustained response against someone ordinary. You mobilize it against someone whose existence genuinely changes the equation of every room they enter. You did not have to expose anyone. Your character was the exposure. Your consistency was the disruption. Your refusal to become what they needed you to become was the final act of dominance, because it left them with no ammunition, no credible narrative, and nowhere left to go. You did not fight dirty. You did not fight at all. 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 You did not fight. And somehow, impossibly, from their perspective, you came out ahead. Not because you out-strategized them, but because the thing carrying you was bigger than any strategy they could deploy against it. They brought weapons to a destiny. The outcome was never really in question. We started with a rule. You only attack what you cannot afford to let survive. You only burn down a field when something is growing there that you know deep in your bones you cannot compete with any other way. Hold that rule and look at everything you now know about what happened to you. Lies were built like walls. A crowd was raised like an army. Accusations were launched like weapons. Your pain was used as ammunition. You were studied and surveilled, and evidence that could not be found naturally was manufactured in its absence. More energy was invested into taking you down than most people ever invest in building something real and lasting. And here you are. You are not bitter, not broken, not cancelled or erased or diminished by any of it. You are here, whole and moving, carrying the specific and undeniable light that belongs to someone who went through fire and came out refined instead of destroyed. Because that is what fire does to something genuinely built to last. It does not destroy it. It burns off everything that was never supposed to be there in the first place. What they called your downfall was your refinement. What they called your vulnerability was your becoming. What they called the end of you was just the end of the version of you that was always too small for where you were going anyway. Now here is what I need you to understand, and this is not weakness language, this is dominion language. The thing that was carrying you through all of this was not just your own resilience, because resilience alone can be worn down. Resilience gets tired. What was carrying you was something bigger than human endurance. There was a covering over your life that their whole campaign kept bouncing off of, and they could not understand why their moves were not landing the way moves like that are supposed to land. That is not coincidence. When you are assigned to something, when there is a purpose written over your life that is bigger than any circumstance you find yourself in, the attacks designed to erase you start functioning as evidence of you instead. Every failed attempt adds to your file. Not the file they were building against you, but the one being built on your behalf by something far greater than their operation ever was. That is exactly why everyone is shocked. They planned for a human response to what they were doing. They planned for collapse or retaliation. They did not plan for someone who just kept walking in their purpose, completely undeflected, while a whole operation ran against them in the background. That outcome was not in their model, because their model did not account for what was covering you. So here is what you do now, not with revenge, not with a counter-campaign, not with the energy of someone still fighting a war that is already over. You move, you build, you keep becoming. You let the record of your life be the loudest possible statement about everything they claimed your life was, and the dust they threw, all that manufactured fog, all those carefully cultivated whispers, all that orchestrated confusion around your name, it settled, the way dust always settles, and what is left standing in the clarity after the dust falls is exactly what was always there, you, consistent, purposeful, and more anchored than ever in who you are and what you are genuinely built for. They were right to come for you, not in the sense that you deserved any of it, but in the sense that their instincts about you were accurate. Something in you was worth fearing. Something in you was going to rise past everything they built. Something in you was always going to outlast every lie they circulated, every crowd they assembled, and every weapon they pointed in your direction. They sensed you were chosen, and they responded accordingly, with everything they had, as early as they could, with the desperation of people who already knew deep down that they were running out of time. The only thing they got wrong was thinking that going all the way would be enough to stop it. It was never going to be enough, because chosen ones do not stop. They do not stay buried. They do not stay defined by the version of themselves that their opposition needed to exist. They keep moving through every season. They keep accumulating. They keep rising in the specific, quiet, and utterly undeniable way that people genuinely built for something always rise, not with noise, not with performance, but with a consistency that compounds over time into something absolutely impossible to argue with. They tried to take you out with zero proof, and they got exactly the result that zero proof deserves. The result of running a zero-proof operation is always the same. They got nothing. And you got everything that was always yours to begin with. Rise, chosen one. The storm was always you. It always will be.